Today on Who's Behind the News, we're going to talk to Gordon Whiting about the parallels between what's been happening under Modi's government in the Indian Free Press and what's happening right here in the United States.
There's no television in India now that is independent of the government. And I mean either a crony owns it or the government itself owns it. And it essentially is a good news, the government's good news all the time PR machine, masquerading as news.
This is all coming from Newsjunkie.net. This is Who's Behind the News. I'm Matt Fidler, and I'm here with Gordon Whiting from Newsjunkie.net. And give me a sentence or two about what Newsjunkie is.
Okay, Matt, News Junkie is a place to look at the news and try to get a sense of where it's going based on where it's been. So we've surveyed the world's news organizations, and our little catchphrase is "Who's behind the news?" the title of this podcast. And that means the obvious: who's the owner, who's the owner of the owner, who are the shell companies, all that intrigue for sure. It's about that. Also about families that own newspapers or radio stations, and it's not always about, some evil corporation. That's one side. The other side is who's behind the making of news? Who are the editors and publishers and reporters, and what are their motivations? And what's their economic situation right now, which is in flux? So we're looking at that. We're talking about it, reporting on it. Our beat is the news business.
Well, things are certainly in flux. As soon as we start talking about one thing, especially with the Trump administration, the subject gets changed so fast that we don't even get to finish the conversation. And the consumers of it are being manipulated. And maybe in one of those ways is manipulating it to just not trust it in a way that it's never been trusted before, or to feel like the news is so toxic that we turn away from it. Is that maybe a better way to say it?
We've surveyed the world's news organizations for more than 3 years now. And what we've learned is that many of them that have an honest mission still have to sell their product. And they will do things that have what you might call a sensationalist, tone to them to get people to pay attention, to subscribe or to buy that issue, if it's a newspaper or, whatever, podcast. It has to be, you have to get their attention first. And that has led to this attention economy that we hear so much about. But the attention economy was really invented by the newspaper titans of the late 19th century. And that became an idea, and it became a profitable one. So again, it's really kind of a matter of degree. I mean, I don't want to sound like it's nothing new, therefore don't worry about it. Worry. It's really bad because, as you say, what's to trust? There is a theory that the point is to break trust, not to replace not to replace my information with what the news media are trying to report truthfully. I, the oligarch, the autocrat, I'm going to replace it with the theory is, and it's a theory, and I think it's got a lot of currency, is to just break up the idea that there's anything trustable. And then the strong man, looking strong, acting strong, putting the troops on the street, is straightening out this chaos, and you can trust that.
Well, then, of course, what about this whole idea of punishment for those larger institutions that maybe have a little bit of trust left? I think of 60 Minutes and CBS as the prime example. They sued CBS for this, and while they didn't admit guilt, they paid him off to make him go away. And we're seeing this in a lot of other places.
Yeah, and that's going on around the world. We've been watching that in India.
Yeah, let's talk about India. What are some of the parallels of India, and what can India teach us about our own situation that we're going in?
Well, again, there's so many things in play that you have to look very carefully and not reach a conclusion too precipitously, but look at the evidence very carefully and before you say, well, this is happening because of this, and therefore it can be analogous to what's about to happen in the United States. But there are some things like that that you can say inform our maybe our near future. India has a strong man. Narendra Modi is the prime minister. He won a third term in office, and he is the leader of a strong party that is Hindu oriented. It's sometimes called Hindutva, Hindu supremacy. Um, you can unpack that even if you don't know, even if you've never heard the term, you get the idea. There are 200 plus million Muslims in India and have been for many centuries, and suddenly they are the outsider and not welcome. But it's really not a way, they're not trying to ship them out of the country. What they're trying to do is consolidate power among the remaining Hindu base, and you're talking about more than 1 billion people.
How is Prime Minister Modi doing this? And
It's complex. It's probably too complex for any kind of, one conversation about it. In terms of our topic here, he's been able to threaten and cajole both, but mostly threaten the large press organizations. India has a tradition of free press, and that has been seriously damaged in the Modi era. It's the idea of a free press, that you could speak without fear or favor, as we like to say here, is no longer the case for the large, I won't name them here, but there are half a dozen newspapers. Newspaper is still a very strong business type of news presentation, but also the television, the digital channels, the internet channels have been either brought to heel by threatening them with tax inquiries or license removal, like the Jimmy Kimmel thing, not so veiled, your license could be impacted here to actually broadcast anything. That they swing that cudgel. They also encourage their cronies to buy control of these news organizations. There's no television in India now that is independent of the government. And I mean either a crony owns it or the government itself owns it. Government owns a BBC-like organization, owns and controls. On the TV side, it's called Darshan, and it essentially is the government's good news all the time PR machine, masquerading as news. And on the radio side, it's All India Radio. And both of them had a very BBC-like quality to them of quasi-independence and good editorial content. And that's no longer the case in terms of being able to criticize the government or look at corruption in the government, corruption of the cronies, the powerful corporate families that cocoon the Modi government. I'm saying a lot of things that would get me in trouble if I were broadcasting from Bombay or Delhi.
so what you're saying is that the press is no longer acting as the fourth estate. I don't know if that's a term they use in India, but
No, but same idea.
yeah, is that where you see the U.S.?
Well, the analogies are with the independent media and the corporate media. The independent media in India is vigorous, it's independent, it's small, it's diffuse, and it is the same here. There's a lot of exciting things happening in North America with independent investigative houses and regional, local news. The internet has enabled that. As much as the internet has been had a negative force on the press, it has also had a beneficial effect, and we shouldn't forget that. In fact, we're very hopeful that new organizations. Let's set this up a little bit for viewers. You have to realize that to be in the news business, you had to climb a very high castle wall. You had to have a lot of talent, a lot of money, resources, and political connections. You had to have real stick-to-itiveness because if you were trying to break into a market, I mean, every market in North America had a newspaper that was a monopoly, essentially. By the 20th century, by the dawn of the 20th century, the markets had been covered. You want to open a newspaper, you want to get into the news business in a region like Chicago or any place, St. Louis, Phoenix, uh, Boulder, Colorado. There was already somebody there. And you had to, what did you have to have? You had to have a way to break through to and develop an audience. That was a very, very tough business proposition. And so there was not a lot of diversity. And now it's, if you've got an internet connection, you can be a publisher. So there's a benefit that we often forget about, maybe because it seems like it's the same old thing. You've got the big houses and CNN and CBS and MSNBC and Fox News controlling so many of the, the bond with the audience. But that's really a marketing thing. And I'm not saying it's not real. It's quite powerful, these sort of the bond with the audience, but the actual distribution has been leveled out. So that functions in India as well as here, as any place around the world, except for those places like where there's government control of access, like in China.
Well, I think you make some great points, and one of them, though, is you talk about the distribution compared to the actual making, investigative journalism, which can be expensive, time consuming, takes a lot of resources in general. Are the smaller, and let's look towards India, because you've talked about how, and I know it's been written on newsjunkie.net how there are some smaller outlets in India, or at least that are covering India, um,
Mhm.
that are out there that are independent that aren't under the thumb of Prime Minister Modi. Can we look to India for hope on smaller organizations taking the responsibility as the fourth estate?
Yeah, I think so. There are some very strong independent um, investigative news organizations in India. Some of them are reporting on India, as you alluded to, but they're not actually incorporated there, which keeps them somewhat out of the reach of the government. I think the main defense that they have is that they're too small and diffuse to really control very easily. When you have a really big house, you can just go straight to their headquarters office and say, this is how it's going to be. And they have, their 6 million subscribers, and that you now control, and the ancillary impressions that is much bigger than those 6 million, and therefore you've changed the influence, you've changed your ability to control the narrative in your favor by putting the boot on the neck of a large press organization, and there's almost, it's not that it's not worth it to go after the smaller ones. It's just harder. You got to commit more resources. They're smaller. They maybe not even be in India. And that's true here. It's harder to control. It's much easier to go after CBS, ABC, Disney. They're all doing business deals, trying to merge. That several of these cases involving the free press here have to do with approval, government approval needed for a merger or a sale. And so that pinch point is control. Okay, that Kimmel guy, you got to get rid of him. Whatever they said, they made it clear what the behavior is that they want, what the behavior is they want from American universities. They make it clear what the price to pay is, both financial price. We need UCLA, we need $1.2 billion in order to restore your 560 million in grants. And you have to show us who you're hiring in faculty, who you're admitting in your students, what you're teaching, all the things that really have never been part of the American picture. They're essentially trying to exert control of, but they have very cleverly found the jugular. It's hard to do when there are a lot of small dots that do a little bit of this and a little bit of that. You asked whether the Indian organizations are capable of doing investigation. They are, but they don't have you know, um, there were some very significant scandals in the early Modi years that were covered, having to do with the purchase of what happened with monies that were allocated for the purchase of fighter jets from France. That kind of a corruption scandal, and it was reported on and effectively reported on by the mainstream. Well, those guys don't do that anymore. They have got the memo. They will not do that. But the small places will report on as much as they can. So there's the limitation. Yes, they can, but they don't have the big resources that the Times of India or the Indian Express or the Hindu, these big, uh, once grand and once penetrative investigative houses.
Do they have the reach? Are they reaching the eyes and ears?
No, well, they do and they don't. I don't mean to equivocate. I'll give you a straight answer. They do. They have to be very selective because they have to worry about commitment of resources. They're just small budget, small staff, a lot of contractor writers and reporters, freelance. So they can only do so much. But that's true even if you're the Washington Post during Watergate. There's only so much you can commit. There might be things that you'd like to cover, but you can't. So you're always in the news business, you're battling, more going on or more that you'd like to cover than you actually can. But it is a real constraint in the modern age, both here, all around the world, in terms of this change that's underway between the large scale legacy houses and these, you know, spunky, sprightly, energetic, go-getter, younger, independent organizations. Some are not that young. ProPublica, is now really well established and they're really good. They're really great. They're an exemplar, but there are a lot of smaller ones that are just trying to cut their teeth and get going.
We're more connected than ever before. Um, Maybe these smaller news organizations can share resources, share audiences.
We're hoping that that's a trend. It hasn't coalesced. There are organizations that promote that. There's a really great house called Institute for Nonprofit News. They have more than 500 members of this very type of thing we're talking about. And they're promoting, exchange of best practices and so forth. But I'd like to see it gel into like you say, a network of, where it's really alive and working in real time rather than a once a year conference where we say we're going to, cooperate.
Are there any big takeaways that you could take from India that could maybe that are things that have been happening in India with their media and with Prime Minister Modi that perhaps those of us in the news media can take a lesson from?
Well, it's in very similar ways. I mean, they seem to be almost vibing each other, Modi and Trump, in this way that they disparage the media and try to instigate or instill doubt, uh, breaking the trust that whatever had been there to reduce that trust because the media, the news, the press tells the truth and criticizes them when that's due to them. And they, of course, don't like that. Trump hates that. Modi hates that. So they try to neutralize that. All the networks, all the big papers are getting heat from the federal government over their coverage. And they're constantly, even if they're not getting any legal threats and lawsuits, they're being berated and run down. That was a parallel to India, but what we've seen is that with the legacy news media backing away from any overt investigation and reporting when it comes to the government and its friends. Our investigation, our survey has told us those news papers and radio stations and TV stations are becoming less interesting. They're hollow.
And so it's uninteresting, and people are tuning out and maybe looking for other places because they realize how hollow it is. And but I think Trump has figured out the answer for that because he makes everything interesting.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point.
That's it's just a natural gift that he has to keep people interested. So, right, he can.
Well, and he's proven that that can work. You know, if you have those kind of skills, it can work.
I don't think those skills are teachable either. I think that's just something you have or you don't.
Yeah, maybe P.T. Barnum or something. You know, I don't know. But you can't discount it. You're absolutely right. But you know, but who wants to watch the Trump show all the time? When you have a habit of the news, is that there? What is it there for? To do what? To turn what brain chemistry on for you? Because it's not purely informational. It really hasn't been for a long time. You know, you're not rationally consuming this in an evenly distributed way, in an even-handed way, so that you can, you know, vote with clarity or talk to your council member or governor with clarity when you sit down to write that beautifully composed letter. It's more of an entertainment type thing. It hits the brain chemistry in a different way. It has evolved to become sort of a habit. So the question for another conversation would be, what what is it changing to, and you know, can it be influenced so that it is maybe at least not terribly damaging to us as individuals or to the community at large, that however we habituate ourselves to Instagram, TikTok, or brain implants or whatever, that have this sort of news-like wrapper around them, but it isn't really information science level news. It's not really that. Most news is not. Most news that we call news, like CBS News, you know, the evening news, or the reporter that's standing there with the backlit of the Congress or the White House or something, and this sort of portentous music playing. It's theater, and it's there to make you feel like you're, I don't know what, involved with, you know, staying up with the important things in your government. It's a show. It has been for a long time. It's just, as I say, it's reached sort of an apogee of intensity of kind of theatrical abuse of information,
Indeed, indeed.
real information science.
Well, thank you for being on Who's Behind the News today. And we'll see you next time and we'll continue this conversation.
Good to talk, Matt.
All right. And that's Who's Behind the News from newsjunkie.net.